Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her face against the small window of the transport shuttle and watched the red sun of Kepler 442 grow larger in the distance. The star looked angry today, she thought. Bright flares danced across its surface like fire on water. She had been studying this system for 3 years and she had never seen the star act this way before. "All colonists, please prepare for landing," announced the pilot over the comm system. "We'll be touching down at Meridian Mining Station in 15 minutes. Sarah gathered her equipment bags and checked her research notes one more time. She was here to study the strange crystal formations that grew deep in the planet's mines. The crystals were unlike anything found on Earth or any other human colony. They seemed to store energy from the planet's magnetic field, and some of the miners claimed they could predict weather changes by watching how the crystals glowed. The shuttle landed with a soft bump on the rocky surface of Kepler 442b. Through the window, Sarah could see the mining complex spread out before them. Tall metal towers reached up into the orange sky, and conveyor belts carried chunks of ore from the deep mines to the processing plants. Nearly 3,000 people lived and worked here, extracting the rare metals that human civilization needed to build faster-than-light engines for their spaceships. Colony Director James Harrison was waiting for her at the landing pad. He was a tall, thin man with gray hair and worried eyes. As Sarah stepped off the shuttle, she noticed he kept looking up at the angry red sun. "Dr. Chen," he said, shaking her hand quickly. "I'm glad you made it safely. We need to talk." "Is something wrong?" Sarah asked, following him toward the main complex. "Our astronomers have been watching the star for the past week," Harrison explained as they walked. "The solar activity is getting worse every day. The radiation levels are climbing, and our computers are predicting a major solar storm within the next 48 hours. Sarah felt her stomach drop. A major solar storm from this close would cook everything on the planet's surface. The colony's shields could protect them for a while, but not forever. "Are we evacuating?" she asked. 3 ships are already on their way from Earth," Harrison said. "They should arrive tomorrow morning. Until then, we just have to hope the star stays calm." But the star did not stay calm. That evening, as Sarah was setting up her equipment in Mineshaft 7, the first wave of radiation hit the planet. The lights flickered, and then the power went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in an eerie red glow. Sarah's communication device crackled to life. It was Harrison's voice, but the signal was full of static. "All personnel, immediate evacuation, solar storm, ships departing in hours." The signal cut out completely. Sarah tried to contact the surface, but her communicator was dead. The electromagnetic radiation from the solar storm was interfering with all electronic equipment. She gathered her gear and headed for the mine elevator, but when she pressed the call button, nothing happened. The elevator was not working. She tried the emergency stairs, but after climbing for 10 minutes, she found that a section of the stairway had collapsed during a small earthquake earlier that week. She was trapped. Sarah sat down on a piece of mining equipment and tried to think. The mine shaft went down nearly 200 meters underground. The walls were solid rock, and the only way out was through the elevator shaft. She had maybe 6 hours of air in her portable life support system. And then, she did not want to think about what would happen then. Hours passed. Sarah's air supply was getting low, and she was starting to feel dizzy. She had found a small crack in the mine wall where some of her strange crystals were growing, and she sat watching them glow and fade in rhythm with her heartbeat. Or maybe that was just her imagination. Then she heard something that made no sense. It sounded like metal scraping against rock, coming from somewhere above her. But that was impossible. The evacuation ships would have left hours ago, and no human technology could fly through the radiation storm that was raging on the surface. The sound got louder, and then Sarah saw lights moving in the darkness above her. Not human lights. These were blue and green, and they moved in patterns that hurt her eyes to look at directly. Something large dropped down into the mine shaft on cables that looked more like living vines than metal rope. It was a creature Sarah had never seen before, wearing a suit that seemed to be made of the same biomechanical material as the cables. The creature was about her size, but its body was wrong somehow. too many joints in its arms and legs, skin that looked like it was made of flexible metal. The creature saw her and froze. For a moment, they stared at each other across the dark mine shaft. Then the creature spoke, and somehow Sarah's universal translator was still working. "Mammal," the creature said in a voice like grinding gears. "Why are you still here? The radiation will kill you." "I'm trapped," Sarah whispered. Her voice was weak from lack of oxygen. "Elevator broken." The creature tilted its head, studying her with eyes that glowed like blue stars. "You are dying," it observed. "Yes," Sarah said. She was too tired to be afraid anymore. The creature was quiet for a long moment. Then it spoke into a communication device on its wrist, using words that Sarah's translator could not interpret. She could hear other voices responding, and they did not sound happy. "My pack leader says we should leave you," the creature told her. "He says you are not worth the risk. Your species is weak and short-lived." Sarah nodded. She did not have the energy to argue. But the creature did something unexpected. It moved closer to her and began examining her broken leg and failing life support system. "My name is Kethvar," it said. "I am an engineer of the Veltar Collective. What is your name, mammal?" "Sarah," she managed to say. "Sarah," Kethvar repeated as if testing the sound. "This is a good name. It has strength in it." More voices came through Kethvar's communicator, and this time they sounded angry. Kethvar responded sharply, and Sarah heard what sounded like an argument. Finally, Kethvar turned off his communicator and looked at her again. "My pack leader has forbidden me to help you," he said. "He says the radiation is too dangerous, and you will probably die anyway." Sarah closed her eyes. She had hoped for a moment that, "But I do not care what he says," Kethvar continued. "You should not die alone in the dark." Before Sarah could respond, Kethvar was lifting her in his arms. His strength was incredible. She felt as light as a child. He carried her to his cables and attached both of them to a harness that extended down from above. The ride up through the mine shaft was a blur. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness as they rose through the darkness. Above them, she could see the opening to the surface where Kethvar's ship was waiting. It was like no human ship she had ever seen. It looked grown rather than built, with a hull that curved and flowed like the shell of some impossible sea creature. Inside the ship, Kethvar placed her in a medical pod that began to change shape around her body. The biomechanical systems were designed for the Veltar's silicon-based biology, but Kethvar worked frantically to modify them for her carbon-based chemistry. "This will hurt," he warned her as tubes extended from the pod to connect with her circulatory system. "But it will keep you alive." Pain shot through Sarah's body as the alien medical systems interfaced with her human biology, but then a cool, tingling sensation spread through her veins. Her breathing became easier and the dizziness began to fade. "How long to the nearest human station?" she asked. 3 weeks, Kethvar replied. "Maybe longer, depending on the radiation storms between here and there." "Will your people be angry that you saved me?" Kethvar was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said finally. "Very angry, but anger passes. Death does not." As the ship lifted off from the dying planet's surface, Sarah watched through a porthole as Kepler 442b fell away behind them. The red sun was throwing massive flares into space, turning the planet's atmosphere into a glowing aurora of deadly radiation. Nothing could have survived on the surface. "Why did you do it?" she asked Kethvar as he worked at the ship's controls. "Your leader was right. I'm just one human. You risked your life, your ship, everything." Kethvar turned to look at her with those glowing blue eyes. "On my world we have a saying," he told her. "The worth of a being is not measured by their strength or their age or their species. It is measured by whether they would do the same for you." "Would I have done the same for you?" Sarah asked. "I do not know," Kethvar admitted. "But I hope so. That is why I took the chance." For the next 3 weeks, as they traveled through the hostile radiation storms that filled the space between star systems, Kethvar tended to Sarah's injuries and kept the modified medical pod running. The biomechanical systems were not designed for human biology. and they required constant adjustment to keep her alive. Sarah learned that the Veltar were nomads, traveling in small family groups called packs from system to system. They were traders and scavengers, looked down upon by most of the other species in the galaxy. The Great Galactic Confederation barely acknowledged their existence. "We are survivors," Kethvar explained, as he adjusted the medical pod's chemistry for the 100th time. "We take what others leave behind and we make it work. It is not a proud existence, but it is existence." "It sounds lonely," Sarah said. "Yes," Kethvar agreed. "It is very lonely." When they finally reached Meridian Station, a human trading post on the edge of civilized space, Sarah was strong enough to walk. The station administrator, a gruff man named Captain Morrison, was shocked to see her. "Dr. Chen, we thought you were dead. The Kepler colony was completely evacuated, and the rescue team said they couldn't find you." "This is Kethvar," Sarah said, gesturing to the Veltar engineer who had remained by her side. "He saved my life." Captain Morrison looked at Kethvar with surprise. The Veltar were known throughout the galaxy, but not for their kindness. They were scavengers, opportunists. They did not risk their lives to save members of other species. "Well," Morrison said after a moment, "I guess we owe you a debt of gratitude." Kethvar shook his head. "I require no payment," he said. "I only did what was right." But as Sarah was being taken to the station's medical bay for proper treatment, she heard Kethvar's communicator crackling with incoming messages. The voices speaking were harsh and angry, and she did not need a translator to understand their tone. "What are they saying?" she asked. Kethvar's expression was sad as he listened to the voices. "My pack leader has declared me exile," he said, quietly. "I am no longer Veltar. I am nothing." Sarah felt her heart break for this strange, kind being who had given up everything to save her life. "What will you do now?" "I do not know," Kethvar admitted. "An exile cannot return to his people. I will find work somewhere, somehow. The galaxy is large." "Stay here," Sarah said impulsively. "Stay on the station. I'll talk to Captain Morrison. We can find you work." Kethvar looked at her with surprise. "You would do this? For me?" "You saved my life," Sarah said simply. "That makes us family now, as far as I'm concerned." As the medical teams took Sarah away for treatment, she looked back at Kethvar standing alone in the docking bay. He looked very small and very lost, surrounded by the vast emptiness of space. But Sarah Chen was already making plans. She was a scientist, which meant she was good at solving problems, and she had just identified a very big problem that needed solving. The galaxy had just made a serious mistake. They had punished someone for showing kindness and courage. They had cast out a being whose only crime was having a conscience. Sarah did not know it yet, but her rescue was about to change everything. Word of what had happened was already spreading through the human communication networks. A human scientist, trapped and dying, saved by an alien who lost everything to help her. It was the kind of story that captured people's imagination and refused to let go. And humans, Sarah was about to learn, had very long memories when it came to those who helped. Their own. The news traveled fast through human space. Within days, every colony, every space station, every ship in the human fleet had heard the story of Dr. Sarah Chen and the Veltar engineer who saved her life. The story grew with each telling, but the basic facts remained the same. A human was trapped and dying. An alien risked everything to save her, and his own people cast him out for his kindness. On Earth, Sarah's story was the lead item on every news broadcast. Reporters interviewed her by video link from Meridian Station, asking her to describe those final hours in the mine and her rescue by Kethvar. Sarah told the story simply and honestly, but she always ended with the same point. "He gave up everything," she would say. "His family, his people, his entire identity. He is alone in the universe because he chose to save one human life." The human public was moved by the story, but it was the reaction of the galaxy's other species that surprised everyone. Most alien civilizations seemed baffled by what Kethvar had done. The Veltar were known as practical survivors who made decisions based on resources and necessity. Saving a dying member of another species went against everything the galaxy knew about them. On Nexus Prime, the capital world of the Galactic Confederation, Ambassador Zeflon of the Hegemony species held a press conference to address the unusual incident. The Hegemony were the oldest and most powerful species in the Confederation, and their opinions carried enormous weight. The Veltar have always been unpredictable, Zeflon said, his translator making his clicking speech sound cold and mechanical. This individual's actions do not represent any change in their species' nature. It was an aberration, nothing more. When a reporter asked whether the Confederation would intervene to help the exiled Veltar, Zeflon's response was dismissive. Interspecies political disputes are not our concern. The Veltar Collective has the right to manage their own members as they see fit. But the human reaction was very different. On colonies throughout human space, something unprecedented began happening. Collection drives started spontaneously, with humans donating money to help support Kethvar. Messages of gratitude poured in from across human space, addressed to the Veltar engineer who had saved one of their own. Admiral Marcus Webb, commander of the Third Fleet, and one of the most respected officers in the human military, made an official statement that was broadcast throughout the galaxy. "Any being who risks their life to save an innocent person is welcome in human space," Webb declared. "We do not forget our friends, and we do not abandon those who help us. Kethvar of the Veltar is now under the protection of the human colonial authority." The statement caused ripples throughout the diplomatic community. Humans were still newcomers to galactic civilization, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 2 centuries earlier. They were respected for their technological innovation and military prowess, but they were still considered junior partners in the galactic community. For them to make such a bold statement about protecting an alien exile was unprecedented. The Veltar Collective's response was swift and angry. Pack leader Threnek, who had expelled Kethvar from his clan, sent a message to the human authorities demanding that they stop interfering in Veltar internal affairs. "The exile chose his path," Threnek declared. "He is no longer one of us. What happens to him is not our concern, but neither should it be yours." But something else was happening in human space, something that would not become clear for several more weeks. In military bases and civilian settlements, in research stations and mining colonies, a phrase had begun appearing in graffiti, in digital messages, and in quiet conversations between humans. One of ours. It started on a mining station near Alpha Centauri, when someone scratched the words onto a bulkhead next to a news report about Sarah's rescue. From there it spread to other stations, other colonies, other ships. It appeared on walls, on computer screens, on the sides of spacecraft. Sometimes it was accompanied by an image of Sarah in the mine, sometimes by a picture of Kethvar, sometimes by both. The human military took notice. Admiral Webb ordered an investigation into what appeared to be some kind of coordinated campaign, but the results were puzzling. There was no central organization behind the message, no leader coordinating the effort. It was completely spontaneous, arising independently in hundreds of human communities across dozens of star systems. "It's unprecedented," reported Colonel Sandra Hayes, Webb's intelligence chief. "We're seeing the same message appear simultaneously in locations that have no communication with each other. It's like the entire human population is thinking the same thought." Meanwhile, on Meridian Station, Sarah was recovering from her ordeal and spending time with Kethvar. The Veltar engineer had taken a job maintaining the station's environmental systems, work that paid barely enough to cover his basic needs but kept him busy and useful. Sarah found him one evening in the engineering section, working on a water recycling unit that had been giving the station's technicians trouble for weeks. Kethvar had it running perfectly in less than an hour. "You're wasted here," Sarah told him as she watched him work. "Your skills are incredible. You could be doing important research, building new technologies, making real contributions to galactic science." Kethvar's blue eyes dimmed slightly. "Exiles do not get such opportunities," he said quietly. "My people have made sure that everyone knows what I am. No respectable organization will employ me." "What if I told you that might be changing?" Sarah asked, She showed him a data pad containing messages that had been arriving daily from human institutions. Universities wanted to offer him research positions. Corporations wanted to hire him as a consultant. The human military was interested in his biomechanical expertise. "I do not understand," Kethavar said, looking at the offers with confusion. "Why would your people want to help me? I am nothing special. I am just an exile who happened to be in the right place at the right time." "You're wrong about that," Sarah said firmly. "What you did wasn't random. You had a choice. You could have left me to die, and no one would have blamed you. Instead, you risked everything to save someone you didn't even know. That tells us exactly what kind of person you are." But it was not just humans who were taking notice of Kethavar's story. Across the galaxy, members of other species were reading the reports and having their own reactions. Most were dismissive, as Zephlon had been, but some were intrigued. Underway. Vega 7, a research station operated by the peaceful Andromedan species. Scientist Kulneth read Sarah's account of her rescue with great interest. The Andromedans were philosophers and thinkers, valued by the Confederation for their wisdom and insight, but Kulneth had always felt that something was missing from galactic civilization. "The humans ask an interesting question," Kulneth said to her colleagues during their daily discussion group. "If we judge species by their age, their technology, their power, then the Veltar are indeed inferior. But if we judge by character, by moral courage, by willingness to sacrifice for others—" "You cannot be serious," interrupted her supervisor, Dr. Clethen. "The Veltar are scavengers and nomads. They have contributed nothing to galactic civilization." "Have they not?" Kulneth asked. "This one individual has done something that I am not sure any of us would have done. He saved a life at enormous personal cost, expecting nothing in return. Is that not the highest form of civilization?" The argument that followed was heated and lasted long into the night, but Kulneth was not the only one asking such questions. Similar discussions were happening on dozens of worlds, in hundreds of communities, among thousands of individuals who had never questioned the galactic order before. Back on Nexus Prime, Confederation intelligence agencies were monitoring the human reaction to Kethavar's story with growing concern. The humans were not just expressing sympathy for the exiled Veltar. They were actively challenging the Confederation's authority. "The humans are overstepping their bounds," Zephlon told the Confederation Council during a closed session. "They claim the right to protect an individual who was legitimately expelled by his own species. This sets a dangerous precedent." Council members from the other major species agreed. The Rigelian delegate, speaking for the military caste, was particularly blunt. "If we allow the humans to interfere in the internal affairs of other species, where does it end? Today they protect one exile. Tomorrow they may decide to protect rebels, dissidents, or criminals. Their concept of individual rights is incompatible with galactic stability." But the humans were not backing down. Admiral Webb had been monitoring Confederation communications, and he knew exactly what the alien leadership was thinking. His response was to double down on human support for Kethavar. Webb arranged for Kethavar to be transferred from Meridian Station to New Geneva, one of humanity's most prestigious research worlds. There he was offered a position at the Xenological Research Institute with full citizenship and all the rights and protections that came with it. The ceremony where Kethavar received his human citizenship was broadcast throughout the galaxy. The image of the lone Veltar exile standing beside human officials, taking an oath of allegiance to human civilization, became one of the most famous photographs in galactic history. But it was Kethavar's speech that truly changed everything. "My own people cast me out for showing compassion," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. "The humans took me in for the same reason. Which civilization is truly advanced? Which species understands the value of individual worth?" The speech was replayed on news networks throughout the galaxy. In some sectors, it was banned by local governments who found its message dangerous. But that only made people more eager to see it. On mining worlds and research stations in the slums of major cities and the remote outposts of frontier space, Beings who had never considered themselves political began to ask questions. If the mighty Galactic Confederation was threatened by one exile's story, what did that say about the Confederation itself? The phrase "one of ours" began appearing in languages other than human. Veltar exiles started using it to refer to each other. Members of conquered species used it to express solidarity. Even some citizens of Confederation worlds began adopting the phrase, much to their government's alarm. Ambassador Zeflon realized that the situation was spiraling out of control. What had started as a simple rescue story was becoming a rallying cry for everyone who felt oppressed or abandoned by the current galactic order. The humans had not just saved one Veltar exile. They had accidentally started a revolution. "We need to take decisive action," Zeflon told the Confederation Council. "The humans must be made to understand that their behavior has consequences." The Council voted unanimously to impose economic sanctions on human colonies and to ban human ships from Confederation stations. It was meant to be a warning shot, a demonstration of what would happen if humans continued to challenge Confederation authority. But when Admiral Webb received news of the sanctions, his response was not what the Confederation expected. "Let them try," Webb said in a public statement. "Humanity has survived worse than economic pressure. We will not abandon our friends for the sake of convenience." The battle lines were drawn. On one side stood the ancient Galactic Confederation with its vast fleets and enormous economic power. On the other side stood humanity, a young species, with more courage than sense, defending the principle that individuals mattered more than politics. And somewhere in the middle stood Kethvar, the exile who had started it all by doing nothing more than what he thought was right. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes doing the right thing was the most dangerous act of all. The Confederation's sanctions hit human space like a hammer blow. Within weeks, human colonies found themselves cut off from vital trade routes. Ships carrying medical supplies were turned away from Confederation stations. Research teams were expelled from joint scientific projects that had been running for decades. On New Geneva, where Kethvar was now working at the Xenological Research Institute, the effects were immediate. The institute had relied on Confederation databases for much of its research, and suddenly that access was gone. Worse, several alien research partners pulled out of ongoing projects, afraid of being associated with humanity's rebellious behavior. Dr. Elizabeth Hawkins, the institute's director, called an emergency meeting of all department heads. The conference room was tense as she delivered the bad news. "We're losing funding from 3 major sources," she announced. "The Andromedan Science Council has suspended our joint research grants. The Vagan Trade Authority has canceled our mineral analysis contracts. And the Rigelian Military Academy has withdrawn their students from our exchange program." Around the table, department heads looked grim. The institute employed over 2,000 researchers and support staff. Without Confederation cooperation, many programs would have to be shut down. "What about Kethvar?" asked Dr. Robert Martinez, head of the engineering department. "Are we going to let him go to satisfy the Confederation?" The room fell silent. Everyone knew that Kethvar's presence was the real reason for the Institute's troubles. Get rid of the exiled Veltar, and the sanctions would probably be lifted. "No," Dr. Hawkins said firmly. "We are not abandoning a colleague to appease bullies. We'll find another way." But finding another way was easier said than done. The Confederation controlled most of the galaxy's major trade routes and research networks. Their economic power was enormous, and they had made it clear that any organization or species that continued to support humanity would face similar consequences. Meanwhile, across human space, ordinary people were feeling the effects of the sanctions in their daily lives. Medical centers ran short of alien-manufactured drugs. Shipping costs skyrocketed as human vessels were forced to use longer, more dangerous routes to avoid Confederation space. Some colonies began to experience food shortages as supply chains were disrupted. The pressure on human leadership was immense. Politicians and business leaders demanded that Admiral Webb find a diplomatic solution to the crisis. Public support for Kethvar began to waver as the economic pain grew worse. But Webb was not backing down. He had been studying intelligence. reports about the Confederation for months, and he had discovered something interesting. The sanctions were hurting Confederation members almost as much as they were hurting humans. Captain Elena Vasquez of the reconnaissance ship Persistent had been conducting covert intelligence-gathering missions along the Confederation border. Her reports painted a picture of an alliance that was not as united as it appeared. The smaller species are not happy, Vasquez reported during a secure briefing. The Veltar nomad fleets are being harassed by Confederation patrols, supposedly, to prevent them from trading with humans. But it's really about control. The hegemony wants to crush any species that might support human policies. Webb leaned forward in his chair. What about the exile communities? That's where it gets interesting, sir, Vasquez continued. There are thousands of Veltar exiles scattered throughout the galaxy, working in mining operations, research stations, and industrial facilities. Most of them are barely surviving, but they're starting to organize. They're calling themselves the Forgotten Ones, and they're using human communication networks to coordinate. Webb smiled grimly. The Confederation thought they were isolating humanity, but they were actually creating new alliances. Every species or individual they punished for supporting human policies became a potential ally. What's our next move, sir? Asked Colonel Hayes. We find Kethvar's people, Webb said. The other exiles, the ones who have been cast out and forgotten. We show them that they're not alone. The operation began quietly, using human intelligence networks that had been operating in Confederation space for years. Captain Vasquez and her team identified Veltar exiles working in dangerous, low-paying jobs throughout the galaxy. Most were living in conditions that were barely above slavery. The first contact was made on Sigma Draconis, an asteroid mining system controlled by a hegemony corporation. Deep in the asteroid belt, thousands of workers from dozens of species labored in dangerous conditions, extracting rare metals for Confederation shipyards. Among them was Veltar engineer named Crenda, who had been exiled 15 years earlier for refusing to abandon injured packmates during a mining accident. He was working 16-hour shifts in a processing plant that recycled the most toxic waste products from the mining operation. When Captain Vasquez's infiltration team made contact with him, Crenda was suspicious and frightened. "Why are you here?" he asked in the broken common that most exiles use to communicate with other species. "What do you want?" "We want to offer you a choice," said Lieutenant Sarah Kim, Vasquez's second-in-command. "You've heard about Kethvar?" Crenda's blue eyes brightened slightly. Every exile in the galaxy knew the story of the Veltar who had saved a human and found a new home among them. "He is fortunate," Crenda said carefully. "But there is only one Kethvar. The humans cannot save us all." "Maybe we can't save everyone," Kim admitted. "But we can save some, and we can offer something that the Confederation never will. The chance to be valued for who you are, not what species you belong to." The conversation went on for hours, conducted in whispers during shift breaks and meal periods. Kim explained that humanity was offering citizenship and protection to any exile who wanted it. The offer came with no strings attached, no requirement to fight against former packmates or to spy on Confederation activities. "We just want to give you the same chance we gave Kethvar," Kim said. "A chance to be part of something that values your contributions and your character." Crenda was quiet for a long time, staring out through the processing plant's small window at the asteroid field beyond. Finally, he spoke. "If I come with you, what happens to the others here? My workmates, the other exiles?" "We can't force them to come," Kim said honestly. "But we can give them the same choice we're giving you. The decision has to be theirs." Word spread quietly through the exile communities on Sigma Draconis. Within days, Kim and her team were contacted by dozens of individuals from different species, all of them outcasts or refugees who had been forgotten by the galactic mainstream. There was Zixal, an Andromedan philosopher who had been expelled from his university for questioning official doctrine. There was Hergen, a Regelian warrior who had been cast out of his clan for refusing to participate in the massacre of civilians during a colonial war. There was Yelneth, a vegan scientist whose research into alternative energy sources had been suppressed by her government. All of them were living in conditions that were barely above poverty, working jobs that no one else wanted, treated as disposable by the corporations that employed them. And all of them jumped at the chance to join human civilization. The extraction operation had to be planned carefully. The Confederation controlled the Sigma Draconis system, and any obvious rescue attempt would be detected and stopped. Instead, the human infiltration teams used a network of sympathetic contacts to smuggle the exiles out one or two at a time. Some were hidden in cargo containers on merchant ships, others were picked up by small human vessels during routine supply runs. A few simply walked away from their jobs and disappeared into the asteroid field, where human ships were waiting to collect them. The Hegemony Corporation that controlled the system noticed that workers were disappearing, but they assumed it was just the normal turnover that happened in dangerous mining operations. Workers died or quit regularly, and the company simply replaced them with new desperate individuals from the exile communities. It took 3 months to extract over 200 individuals from Sigma Draconis alone. They were taken to human colonies throughout the border regions, where they were offered citizenship, job training, and the chance to start new lives. But the operation at Sigma Draconis was just the beginning. Intelligence reports were coming in from across Confederation space about similar communities of exiles and outcasts. On dozens of worlds, millions of beings were living as second-class citizens or worse, forgotten by their own species and exploited by Confederation corporations. Admiral Webb realized that humanity had stumbled onto something much bigger than they had expected. The Confederation's power was built partly on the suffering of these forgotten populations. If those populations could be offered an alternative. "We're not just rescuing individuals anymore," Webb told his senior staff during a strategy meeting. "We're challenging the entire foundation of Confederation society." The Confederation leadership was slow to realize what was happening. The Biad's disappearance of a few hundred workers from mining operations was not unusual. Exiles died or moved on regularly, and their absence was rarely noticed by authorities. But when human intelligence assets began making contact with exile communities, on other worlds the pattern became harder to ignore. Reports began reaching Nexus Prime about human agents operating in Confederation space, offering citizenship and protection to displaced populations. Ambassador Zeflon called an emergency session of the Confederation Council to address the crisis. "The humans are conducting illegal operations in our territory," he declared. "They are kidnapping workers and undermining the labor force that our economy depends on." "Perhaps the question we should be asking," said Council Member Coolneth of the Andromedans, "is why so many individuals are eager to leave their homes for an uncertain future with a species they barely know." Zeflon's translator made a sound like grinding metal as he responded. "The humans are offering false promises to desperate individuals. They cannot possibly absorb millions of refugees into their small colonial empire." "Can they not?" asked Coolneth. "Their colonies are expanding rapidly, and they have a proven record of integrating diverse populations. Perhaps their offer is not as false as we assume." The argument that followed split the Confederation Council along lines that had not existed before. The older, more established species supported Zeflon's position that human interference was a threat to galactic stability, but some of the smaller, younger species began to question whether the current system was worth defending. The debate was interrupted by an urgent communication from fleet headquarters. A hegemony patrol had intercepted a human vessel in the Procyon system carrying over 50 exiles from various species. When the human captain was ordered to surrender his passengers, his response was broadcast on all frequencies. "These individuals are under the protection of the Human Colonial Authority," Captain James Foster declared. "Any attempt to take them by force will be considered an act of war." The Hegemony Patrol Commander was faced with a choice. He could attack the human ship and risk starting a war, or he could let it go and face the anger of his superiors. He chose to let the ship pass. When news of the incident reached Nexus Prime, Zeflon realized that the situation had moved beyond diplomatic protests and economic sanctions. The humans were openly defying Confederation authority, and they were getting away with it because no one wanted to fire the first shot in what could become a galaxy-wide war. "We need to take decisive action," Zeflon told the Council. The humans must be made to understand that there are consequences for their behavior. But what those consequences would be, and whether the Confederation was prepared to enforce them, remained unclear. The humans had called their bluff, and now the galaxy was watching to see who would blink first. In his laboratory on New Geneva, Kethvar worked late into the night on a new research project, unaware that his rescue had set in motion events that would reshape galactic civilization. He was developing new biomechanical interfaces that could help wounded soldiers recover from severe injuries, technology that combined the best of human and Veltar engineering. It was exactly the kind of work he had always dreamed of doing, the kind of contribution to galactic science that had been denied to him as an exile, and he was doing it in a place where his character mattered more than his species or his past. He did not know it yet, but thousands of other exiles across the galaxy were about to get the same chance. The breaking point came 6 months after the sanctions began, when the Confederation made a decision that shocked the entire galaxy. Ambassador Zeflon announced that Confederation fleet units would establish a blockade around the Sol system, humanity's home territory. The humans have shown that they cannot be trusted to respect galactic law, Zeflon declared in a broadcast that reached every inhabited world in the galaxy. They have interfered in the internal affairs of sovereign species. They have stolen workers from lawful employers. They have harbored criminals and exiles. This behavior cannot be allowed to continue. The blockade fleet was massive. Over 300 warships from a dozen different Confederation species, including some of the most advanced vessels in the galaxy. They took position at the edge of the Sol system, their weapons powered and their shields raised. Admiral Webb watched the enemy fleet deploy from the command center of Luna Base, humanity's primary military headquarters. The tactical displays showed the overwhelming disparity in numbers and firepower. The human fleet could put maybe 50 warships into the field against 300 Confederation vessels. "Sir," said Colonel Hayes, "they're demanding that we surrender Kethvar and the other exiles we've taken in. They want them returned to Confederation custody within 48 hours, or they'll begin military action." Webb studied the display, his face grim. Every officer in the command center knew the math. Humanity could not win a direct military confrontation with the Confederation, but they also knew that surrendering would mean abandoning everyone who had trusted human promises of protection. "What's the status of the evacuation?" Webb asked. "Civilian transport ships are moving non-essential personnel to the outer colonies," reported Captain Sarah Kim, who had been promoted after her successful operations in Confederation space. "But we can't evacuate everyone. Most people are choosing to stay." Webb was not surprised. When the blockade was announced, the human government had offered to evacuate anyone who wanted to leave. But the response from the civilian population had been overwhelming, and overwhelmingly negative. They would not abandon their homes, and they would not abandon their principles. The same spirit was showing itself throughout human space. On New Geneva, where Kethvar and hundreds of other exiles had found new lives, the colonial government announced that they would not comply with Confederation demands. "We will not hand over innocent people to appease bullies," declared Governor Maria Santos in a speech that was broadcast throughout human territory. "If that means war, then we will face war with our heads held high." But what happened next surprised everyone, including Admiral Webb. As the Confederation blockade tightened around the Sol system, other ships began arriving. They were not human vessels. They were small, battered craft from dozens of different species, many of them flying under no recognizable flag. The first to arrive was a Veltar nomad ship, its hull scarred from years of hard use and dangerous journeys. It took position alongside the human defense fleet, its captain transmitting a simple message. "This is Krenda, of the Forgotten Ones," came the translated voice. "We stand with those who stand for us." It was the exile from Sigma Draconis, the one who had been among the first to accept human protection. But he had not come alone. Behind his ship came others, more Veltar exiles, Andromedan philosophers, Rigelian warriors, vegan scientists, and dozens of representatives from species that most people had never heard of. They were the Forgotten Ones, the outcasts and refugees who had been living on the margins of galactic civilization. and they were coming to defend the only species that had ever offered them hope. Admiral Webb stared at the tactical display as more and more ships appeared. Most of them were small, old, and poorly armed, but there were hundreds of them, and more were arriving every hour. "Sir," said Colonel Hayes, his voice filled with wonder, "we're receiving messages from exile communities throughout the galaxy. They're mobilizing. They're coming here." The Confederation commanders were just as surprised. The blockade force had been prepared to face the human fleet, but they had not expected to confront a coalition of species they had written off as irrelevant. On the Confederation flagship, Fleet Admiral Klex Han studied the growing collection of exile ships with growing concern. His intelligence staff had counted over 800 vessels so far, with more arriving constantly. "What are we looking at?" Klex Han asked his tactical officer. "Mostly civilian ships that have been converted for combat," came the response. "Their weapons are outdated and their armor is minimal. Individually, they pose no threat. But together, sir, they represent a significant challenge. We could destroy them all, but it would be messy and expensive." Klex Han understood the problem. The Confederation had the firepower to crush any resistance, but doing so would require killing thousands of individuals from dozens of species. The political consequences of such a massacre would be enormous, but the real shock came when ships began arriving from within Confederation space itself. They were not exile vessels this time, but legitimate military and civilian craft flying the flags of Confederation member species. The first was an Andromedan research vessel commanded by Dr. Kulneth, the philosopher who had been questioning Confederation policies since Kethavar's story first became public. Her ship took position between the human fleet and the Confederation blockade, transmitting on all frequencies. "This is Dr. Kulneth of the Andromedan Science Council," she announced. "I speak for all beings who believe that civilization is measured not by power or age, but by how we treat those who cannot help us in return. We stand with humanity." Behind her came other ships from the Andromedan fleet, their crews made up of scientists and philosophers who had grown tired of serving a system that valued conformity over conscience. They were joined by vessels from smaller Confederation species who had decided that they could no longer support policies they found morally repugnant. Most shocking of all were the Veltar ships that began arriving. Not exile vessels this time, but craft from the official collective fleets. Pack leaders who had watched the exile crisis unfold had begun questioning their own traditions and loyalties. Pack leader Yenthra was the first to break with the collective leadership. Her ship, carrying nearly 200 Veltar warriors and engineers, transmitted a message that sent shockwaves through both fleets. "The collective cast out Kethavar for showing mercy," she declared. "But mercy is not weakness, it is the highest form of strength. We renounce the collective and claim kinship with all beings who value life over politics." Admiral Webb found himself commanding a fleet that included humans, Veltar exiles, Andromedan philosophers, Rigelian dissidents, and representatives from nearly 50 different species. It was the most diverse military force in galactic history, united not by species or politics but by shared principles. The political situation was spinning out of control. The Confederation Council met in emergency session as reports came in of defections and rebellions throughout their territory. Species that had been loyal members for centuries were questioning their allegiance. Military units were refusing orders. Entire star systems were declaring independence. Ambassador Zephlon, his confidence shaken by the scale of the defections, called for an immediate assault on the Sol system before the situation got worse. "We must crush this rebellion now," he declared, "before it spreads any further." But other council members were having second thoughts. The Vegan delegate, speaking for the scientific community, pointed out the obvious problem. "If we attack now, we will be firing on our own citizens as well as the humans," she said. "How do we justify killing Andromedan scientists or Rigelian warriors who are guilty of nothing more than following their consciences?" The debate raged for hours, broadcast live throughout Confederation space. Citizens who had never paid attention to politics before found themselves glued to their communication screens. watching their leaders argue about whether to start a war over one exile's rescue. Meanwhile, in the Sol system, the two fleets faced each other across the void. The Confederation forces still outnumbered the human coalition, but the margin was shrinking every hour as more defectors arrived. On New Geneva, Kethavar watched the standoff develop with a mixture of pride and guilt. He had never asked to become the symbol of galactic resistance, but that was exactly what had happened. His rescue had sparked a movement that was now threatening to tear apart the established order. "I never meant for this to happen," he told Sarah Chen during one of their regular conversations. Sarah had become something like a sister to him, and she was one of the few people who could understand the weight he was carrying. "You didn't cause this," Sarah assured him. "You just revealed something that was already there." The galaxy was full of people who were tired of being told that their lives didn't matter. You gave them hope that things could be different. "But what if I was wrong?" Kethavar asked. "What if the humans cannot protect all of us? What if this leads to a war that destroys both sides?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Then she smiled. "Do you remember what you told me in the mine?" she asked. "You said that the worth of a being is measured by whether they would do the same for you. Well, look around. Thousands of beings from dozens of species are risking everything to stand with us. I think you have your answer." The standoff continued for 3 days, with neither side willing to fire the first shot. The Confederation fleet had the firepower to win, but using it would mean starting a civil war that could tear the galaxy apart. The human coalition had the moral high ground, but moral victories meant nothing if they all ended up dead. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Pack leader Threnak, the Veltar commander who had originally exiled Kethavar, arrived at the edge of the Sol system with a small fleet of collective warships. For a moment, both sides assumed he was there to support the Confederation. But when Threnak transmitted his message, it became clear that the galaxy had changed more than anyone had realized. "I have come to speak with the exile Kethavar," Threnak announced. "I have come to ask his forgiveness and to offer the support of all Veltar who have remembered what it means to be worthy of the name." Behind him came the bulk of the Veltar collective fleet, their crews ready to stand with their former exile against the forces that had cast him out. The balance of power had shifted completely. Admiral Webb realized that he was no longer commanding a desperate defense of human territory. He was leading a galactic revolution, and the old order was crumbling faster than anyone had thought possible. The question now was not whether the humans could survive the Confederation's attack. The question was whether the Confederation itself would survive what it had accidentally created. The end came not with the thunder of weapons fire, but with the quiet click of communication channels opening across space. Fleet Admiral Klexhan of the Confederation blockade found himself staring at a tactical display that showed his forces, now outnumbered 3-1 by the growing coalition of humans, exiles, and defectors. More importantly, intelligence reports from across Confederation space painted a picture of an empire in collapse. Over 40% of member species had declared independence or were actively rebelling against central authority. Military units throughout the galaxy were refusing orders. The great alliance that had ruled the galaxy for millennia was falling apart, sir, his tactical officer reported. "We're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. Admiral Webb is requesting a meeting." Klexhan studied the display one more time. His ship still had superior firepower, but using it would mean starting a war that would destroy both sides and accomplish nothing. The political situation had moved beyond military solutions. "Tell Admiral Webb I'll meet with him," Klexhan said finally. "But it will be unconditional negotiation, not surrender." The meeting took place aboard a neutral station in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in a conference room that had been hastily converted from a mining facility control center. It was a far cry from the elegant council chambers of Nexus Prime, but perhaps that was fitting. Admiral Webb sat across from Fleet Admiral Klexhan, with delegates from the human coalition arranged around them. Dr. Kulneth was there representing the Andromedan defectors. Pack leader Yenthra spoke for the Veltar rebels. Captain Elena Vasquez had been promoted to represent human intelligence operations, and in a chair at the head of the table sat Kethavar, the exile whose rescue had started everything. "Let me be clear about our position," Webb began. "We are not asking for anything that should be controversial. We want the right to offer citizenship and protection to any being who asks for it, regardless of their species or political status. We want the right to judge individuals by their character and actions, not by what government happens to claim authority over them." Klexhan's translator made the clicking sounds that indicated stress in his species. "What you're asking for would destroy the entire foundation of galactic civilization. Species sovereignty is what prevents chaos and war between different populations. Species sovereignty is what allows the strong to oppress the weak," Dr. Kulneth interjected. "It's what lets governments abandon their own citizens when they become inconvenient." The argument that followed went on for hours, covering everything from political theory to practical concerns about refugee populations. But the real breakthrough came when Kethavar himself spoke. "I have a question for Fleet Admiral Klexhan," the Veltar engineer said quietly. "If your child was trapped and dying in a collapsed mine, and a human risked his life to save her, would you want that human punished for interfering in your species' affairs?" Klexhan was quiet for a long moment. When he finally answered, his voice was subdued. "No," he said. "I would want to thank him." "Then why is it different when I saved Dr. Chen?" The question hung in the air, unanswered and unanswerable. Everyone in the room understood the point Kethavar was making. Compassion and courage were not crimes, regardless of what species was involved. The negotiations continued for 3 days, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The Confederation forces were facing not just a military coalition, but a moral revolution that had spread across the galaxy. Fighting it would require crushing the very principles that made civilization worth defending. The agreement that emerged was called the New Geneva Accords, named after the human colony where Kethavar had found his new home. It established a new framework for galactic civilization, based on individual rights rather than species sovereignty. Under the Accords, any sentient being would have the right to seek citizenship with any government that would accept them, regardless of their species of origin. No government could claim ownership over individuals or prevent them from leaving if they chose to do so. Most importantly, acts of compassion and rescue would be protected under galactic law, not punished. The signing ceremony was broadcast throughout the galaxy. Representatives from over 200 species put their names to the document, creating the largest and most diverse political alliance in galactic history. Ambassador Zeflon was not among the signers. The hegemony delegation walked out of the negotiations when it became clear that their vision of species-based hierarchy was being rejected. Several other traditional powers followed them, but they were now a minority. The new Galactic Council of Free Species held its first session on New Geneva, in a simple conference center built from local materials. There were no grand palaces or ancient monuments, just functional buildings designed to serve the needs of beings from hundreds of different species. Admiral Webb, now promoted to Grand Admiral and serving as the Council's first military coordinator, opened the session with a speech that was broadcast to every inhabited world. "We are not here to rule or to dominate," he said. "We are here to serve the principle that every sentient being has inherent worth and dignity, regardless of where they come from or what they look like. We are here to ensure that no one is abandoned or forgotten simply because they inconvenience the powerful." The first major act of the new council was to establish the Refugee Protection Service, an organization dedicated to helping displaced populations find new homes. Dr. Sarah Chen, now serving as the service's first director, worked with teams of volunteers from across the galaxy to process applications from millions of beings seeking better lives. The old Confederation territories split into dozens of smaller governments, some aligning with the new council and others maintaining independence. But even the holdout governments found themselves adopting some of the Accord's principles, as their own populations demanded the same rights that others were enjoying. The transformation was not without problems. Integrating millions of refugees from different species required enormous resources and careful planning. Some human colonies struggled to accommodate the influx of new residents. There were cultural conflicts, resource shortages, and political tensions. But there were also successes that exceeded everyone's expectations. Veltar engineering techniques revolutionized human manufacturing. Andromedan philosophical traditions enriched human education systems. Rigelian military discipline improved human fleet operations. The diversity that some had feared as a weakness became humanity's greatest strength. 5 years after the signing of the New Geneva Accords, Kethavar stood on the observation deck of the New Geneva orbital station, watching ships from across the galaxy dock at the ports below. Humans, Veltar, Andromedans, Rigelians, and dozens of other species worked together in the station's docks, loading cargo and preparing for journeys to the far reaches of space. Sarah Chen joined him at the observation window, now bearing the title of ambassador to the Galactic Council. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Saving me that day in the mine? Starting all of this?" Kethavar considered the question seriously. The galaxy was very different now, and not everyone was happy about the changes. The transformation had come at a cost in stability and tradition. Some worlds were still fighting civil wars between old and new factions. "No," he said finally. "I do not regret it. Look at what we have built." Below them, a mixed crew of humans, and Veltar was loading humanitarian supplies onto a ship bound for a war-torn system in the former Confederation territories. Next to them, an Andromedan research vessel was taking on volunteers for a scientific expedition to explore uncharted regions of the galaxy. "When I was in exile," Kethavar continued, "I thought my life was over. I had lost my people, my identity, everything that defined who I was. But I learned something important. We are not defined by where we come from or what others think of us. We are defined by what we choose to do when faced with moral choices." "And what did you choose?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. "I chose to save a life," Kethavar said simply, "even though it cost me everything I thought I valued, and in return, I gained something more valuable than I had ever imagined." "What's that?" "A galaxy where saving lives is celebrated rather than punished. A civilization where character matters more than politics. A future where no one has to face death alone in the dark because others are too afraid to help." As they watched, a new ship appeared in the distance, its hull bearing the markings of the Refugee Protection Service. It was bringing another group of displaced beings to New Geneva, where they would be offered the same chance that Kethavar had received. The opportunity to start over in a place that valued them for who they were, rather than where they came from. The ship's manifest would list beings from a dozen different species, each with their own story of loss and hope. Some would be exiles like Kethavar. Others would be refugees from wars or natural disasters. A few would be individuals whose only crime was believing that there had to be something better than the lives they were leaving behind. All of them would be welcomed because that was what the new galaxy was built on. The radical idea that every individual mattered, that every life had value, and that showing compassion was not a crime, but the highest expression of civilization. In the years that followed, historians would debate the exact moment when the old galactic order collapsed and the new one was born. Some would point to the Kepler rescue, others to the first defections from the Confederation fleet, still others to the signing of the New Geneva Accords. But Kethavar knew the truth. The new galaxy was born in a collapsed mine shaft on a dying world, when one being chose to risk everything to save another. Everything that followed was just the inevitable result of that single act of conscience. The memorial that was eventually built on New Geneva bore a simple inscription in the languages of all the species that had joined the coalition. "They saved one of us. We brought justice for all of them." Below the inscription was a list of names that grew longer each year, honoring every being who had chosen compassion over convenience, courage over conformity, and individual dignity over political expediency. At the top of the list were 2 names: Sarah Chen, the human who had been saved, and Kethavar of the Veltar, the exile who had chosen to save her. But the list that truly mattered was not carved in stone. It was written in the hearts of billions of beings across the galaxy, who now lived in a civilization that valued them not for their species or their politics, but for their fundamental worth as conscious feeling beings. It was a civilization built on the simple truth that sometimes saving one person can save everyone, and in the end, that was enough to change the universe.
Tom Miller shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The chair, designed for beings with very different body shapes, dug into his back. He was the only human in the Grand Council chamber of Nexus Prime, the massive space station where the Galactic Council held its meetings. The room itself was impressive, a huge dome with stars visible through the clear ceiling. Around a U-shaped table sat the representatives of the 12 most powerful species in the galaxy. Some looked almost human, while others were completely alien, from the crystal-bodied Vex to the blue-skinned water brothers like Nara. All of them had been traveling among the stars for thousands of years before humans had even invented the wheel. And all of them were now talking about a problem that affected millions of lives across the galaxy. The energy shortage on the frontier worlds has reached crisis levels, said Councillor Dren, whose green skin wrinkled with concern. 3 colonies have already been abandoned. More will follow soon. Councillor Nara, whose blue skin shimmered under the bright lights, gestured with her webbed hands. The distant worlds simply consume more energy than we can transport to them. Even our fastest ships take too long to deliver fuel. Tom listened carefully. Earth had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago, when alien ships first landed in major cities across the planet. Humans were still seen as newcomers, barely trusted with the simplest technology. At these meetings, he was usually expected to sit quietly and learn. Councillor Vex rose from his seat, his crystal body catching the light. There is a theoretical solution, a Dyson ring. The chamber went silent. Tom had heard of Dyson spheres, megastructures built around stars to capture their energy. A Dyson ring would be a smaller version, capturing perhaps 30% of a star's output instead of all of it. The energy captured would solve the frontier problems for centuries, Vex continued. However, I mention it only as a theoretical concept. Building such a structure is, of course, impossible. Quite impossible, agreed Nara. The gravitational calculations alone would require computational power beyond even our most advanced systems. Another counselor, a 6-legged being named Crawl, added, the material requirements are absurd. No known substance could withstand the stresses involved. Tom frowned. In his 5 years as Earth's representative, he had noticed something about the older species. They were brilliant and advanced, but they were also careful. Too careful, perhaps. They'd rarely tried anything truly new anymore. Before he could stop himself, Tom spoke up. Earth would be willing to attempt building the Dyson ring. The silence that followed was brief, broken by sounds that Tom recognized as laughter from a dozen different species. Ambassador Miller, said Vex kindly, as if speaking to a child, your enthusiasm is noted, but humans have been spacefaring for less than a century. The Dyson ring has been deemed impossible by civilizations with million-year histories of engineering. Nara's voice was gentler. The physics involved are beyond even our understanding, Ambassador. No offense meant, but if we cannot build it, humans certainly cannot. Tom felt his face grow hot, but he kept his voice calm. Humans have a history of achieving impossible things, counselors. Sometimes fresh eyes see solutions that experienced ones miss. This is not about building a slightly better spaceship, Crawl said. This is about constructing a megastructure around a star. The scale is beyond your comprehension. The council moved on to other topics, but Tom couldn't let go of the idea. As the meeting ended, he approached Vex. If Earth were to attempt the Dyson Ring project, would the council object? Vex seemed amused. No, Ambassador. The council would not object to an impossible project. The attempt itself would be educational for your species. Then may we have access to the theoretical plans, all the research that's been done on the concept. Vex hesitated, then nodded. I see no harm in that. I'll have the files transferred to your systems. But Ambassador, don't raise false hopes among your people. This project cannot succeed. 3 weeks later, Tom stood in a large conference room in Houston, Earth. On the screens around him were the faces of some of Earth's brightest minds, scientists, engineers, and builders from around the planet. They say it can't be built, Tom concluded after explaining the Dyson ring concept. They've convinced themselves it's impossible. Kate Reed, a physicist known for her unconventional theories, snorted. People said the same thing about flying machines once. And space travel, added Miguel Ortiz, a materials engineer who had developed new alloys for Mars habitats. Jack Thompson, a construction expert with more wrinkles than a dried apple, leaned forward. Son, throughout history, the most important projects started with someone saying, "It can't be done." Then someone else does it anyway. Tom smiled. This was exactly the reaction he had hoped for. The aliens think we'll fail. They think we'll learn our limits and settle into our place in the galactic order. Well, they don't know humans very well, do they? Kate said, her eyes bright with excitement. I've already spotted 3 flaws in their gravitational models. They're too perfect, too by the book. Miguel was scanning the material specifications. They're only considering known materials. But I've been working on some nanostructured composites that might handle these stresses. The construction approach is all wrong too, Jack muttered, studying the plans. Too complicated. There are simpler ways to build big. Tom looked around at their excited faces and felt a surge of hope. So, you think it might be possible? Kate grinned. Possible? I'd say it's inevitable. The math works out if you approach it differently. I'll need a proper team and a budget, Miguel said. And access to the asteroid belt for raw materials. Jack nodded. And we'll need a construction site far from Earth. Something close to Jupiter, maybe, where we can test in different gravity. Tom took a deep breath. I'll secure the funding and permissions. We'll need to work quietly at first. If we fail, I don't want Earth to lose face. We won't fail, Kate said firmly. How can you be so sure? Tom asked. Because, Jack answered with a smile that crinkled his entire face. They said it couldn't be built. And nothing motivates humans more than being told something is impossible. 6 months passed quickly. The asteroid base near Jupiter, now called Impossible Station by the human team, buzzed with activity. What had started with just 3 experts had grown into a team of 50 top scientists and engineers from Earth. The base itself was simple but effective, a hollowed-out asteroid with pressurized chambers, connected by metal tunnels. In the main research dome, Kate Reed stood before a huge transparent board covered in equations and diagrams. The aliens' math isn't wrong, she explained to Tom, who had come to check on their progress. It's just too perfect, too rigid. Tom watched as she added more symbols to the already crowded board. What do you mean? They approach everything logically, step by step. But that's not how the universe actually works. Kate pointed to a section of complex calculations. See here. When they hit a calculation problem, they stop. They say, this is where it becomes impossible. But humans, she smiled. We guess. We make logical leaps. We use intuition. Across the room, a small group of alien observers watched with barely hidden amusement. The Galactic Council had sent them to monitor the human project and report back. None of them expected success. Intuition is not a scientific method, said one observer, a tall being named Zal with pale skin. Maybe not, Kate replied without looking up from her work. But it's very human. And sometimes it works where pure logic fails. In another chamber of the base, Miguel Ortiz was surrounded by material samples and testing equipment. He had been working for weeks on creating a substance that could withstand the extreme stresses of the Dyson ring. As Tom entered, Miguel cursed as he knocked over his coffee mug. The hot liquid spilled across his workbench, flowing over a sample of experimental nanomaterial. Sorry about the mess, Miguel said, grabbing a cloth to clean up. Then he stopped, staring at the sample. Wait, that's interesting. Tom looked over his shoulder. What is? The coffee, It's caused a reaction in the nanomaterial. Miguel quickly placed the sample under a microscope, then let out a whoop of joy. The heat and compounds in the coffee have created exactly the kind of molecular bonding I've been trying to achieve for weeks. You discovered a crucial material by spilling coffee? Asked Zol from the doorway, his voice filled with disbelief. Miguel grinned. Sometimes the best discoveries happen by accident. The history of human science is full of such moments. He carefully placed the sample in a testing chamber. I think we just solved our material strength problem. The alien observer left the room, shaking his head. In the largest chamber of the base, Jack Thompson had created what looked like a strange playground. Models of different shapes and sizes hung from the ceiling. On the floor, robotic arms moved pieces of metal into various formations. "What's all this?" Tom asked, looking around in confusion. "I'm testing construction methods," Jack explained. He pointed to a model that looked like a pyramid. The ancient Egyptians built massive structures using simple tools and clever techniques. Here, he moved to another model. The Polynesians navigated vast oceans using just the stars and currents. "But we have advanced technology now," Tom said, puzzled. "Yes, and we'll use it. But the old ways have wisdom too." Jack activated a small demonstration where tiny robots arrange blocks in a specific pattern. "I'm combining ancient building techniques with modern robotics. The aliens think too complicated. Sometimes simpler is better." That evening, Tom met with the 3 experts in the base's small meeting room. The alien observers were filing their daily reports to the council. "So, what's our progress?" Tom asked. Kate spoke first. "My new computational approach works. I solved the gravitational equations by using a combination of quantum algorithms and what I call educated guesswork. The aliens never considered this approach because it's not purely logical." Miguel held up a small cube of shimmering material. "And I've developed this. I'm calling it CoffeeCom." He grinned. "It has exactly the properties we need for the ring's core structure. Lightweight but stronger than anything the aliens have. My construction methods are ready for testing too," Jack added. "Using swarms of small robots rather than a few big machines will make building the ring much faster and more adaptable." Tom looked at them with amazement. "So you're saying it's actually possible? We can build the Dyson ring?" "Not only possible," Kate said with confidence, "but we can do it better and faster than anyone expects." "And what about the alien observers?" Tom asked. "What are they reporting back?" "They think we're making interesting progress, but will ultimately fail," Miguel said with a laugh. "Zol told me directly that our approaches are creative but unsustainable." Jack snorted. "They're stuck in their ways. They've been building things the same way for thousands of years. They can't imagine a different approach might work." The meeting was interrupted when Zol entered the room. The alien looked uncomfortable. "I have just received a message from the council," he said formally. "They are surprised by your progress. Councillor Vex will be arriving tomorrow to inspect your work personally." After Zol left, Tom turned to his team with concern. "This could be trouble. If the council decides our project threatens the galactic order somehow, then we better have something impressive to show them," Kate said firmly. "Let's get to work." Through the night, the human team prepared demonstrations of their innovations. As the station's lights dimmed to simulate night, creating a more comfortable working environment for the humans, activity continued in all research chambers. In her private notes, Kate wrote, "The aliens don't understand us. They think our greatest strength is our technology, but it's not. It's our creativity, our willingness to take risks, to try the untried. They've been among the stars so long they've forgotten how to dream. But we haven't, and that's why we'll succeed where they failed." 1 year after Tom first proposed the Dyson Ring project, the construction site around a small red dwarf star buzzed with activity. What had begun as a small team had grown into a massive operation. Thousands of engineers, scientists, and construction workers from Earth now worked together on what many still call the impossible project. From the observation deck of the command ship, Tom looked out at the growing structure. Already, they had completed nearly 1% of the ring. It wasn't much compared to the final design, but it was proof that humans could do what the galaxy's oldest civilizations had deemed impossible. "Impressive, isn't it?" Kate said, joining him at the window. "The first segment is already capturing enough energy to power the entire construction operation." Tom nodded. "And the Council can't ignore our progress anymore." Indeed, news of the human project had spread throughout the galaxy. Some alien races watched with interest, others with concern. The Galactic Council maintained its official position that the project would ultimately fail, but privately, many councilors were becoming worried. Below them, massive factory ships converted asteroid material into the specialized components designed by Miguel. His coffee comp material had proven even better than expected. Lightweight, incredibly strong, and able to withstand the extreme conditions near a star. Swarms of construction robots, programmed with Jack's algorithms, moved through space like schools of fish, placing each component with perfect precision. The robots worked together in ways inspired by Earth's natural systems. Ants building colonies, bees constructing hives, and humans raising ancient monuments. Kate called Miguel over the communication system. "We've got a problem with Section 14. The gravitational readings are off." Kate rushed to her console and pulled up the data. Her fingers flew over the controls as she adjusted her mathematical models. "I see it," she said. "The star just had a minor flare that affected the local gravity field, redirecting construction robots to compensate." On the main screens, they could see the robot swarms shifting their patterns, adjusting their work to account for the new calculations. This kind of rapid adaptation was exactly what made the human approach different. Where alien engineers might have stopped to recalculate everything from scratch, Kate's systems simply adjusted on the fly. "Ambassador Miller, called a crew member. Counselor Vex has arrived and requests to inspect the construction." Tom straightened his uniform. "Right on schedule. Let's go greet him." The crystalline form of Counselor Vex seemed to shimmer with barely contained surprise as Tom guided him through the construction command center. "I must admit, Ambassador, your progress is unexpected," Vex said carefully. "Though you've built less than 1% of the total structure, the complexities increase exponentially from here." Tom smiled. "We're well aware, Counselor, but our adaptive systems are designed to handle increasing complexity." Indeed, Vex studied the screens showing construction data. "And what of the material stresses? Our models predict failure once the structure reaches 5% completion." "Those models didn't account for our new materials," Miguel explained, joining them. He handed Vex a small sample of coffee comp. "This can withstand forces 10 times greater than your models predicted would be necessary." Vex held the material, his crystalline fingers testing its strength. "Remarkable. And this was accidental." "A happy accident," Miguel confirmed. But recognizing its potential wasn't accidental at all. They continued the tour, showing Vex the robot construction swarms and the energy collection systems already in operation. Throughout it all, the counselor remained polite but skeptical. "Impressive progress," he admitted as the tour concluded. "But you've completed the easiest parts first. The true challenges lie ahead." After Vex departed for his return to the council, Tom felt a mixture of pride and concern. The alien races were finally taking the human project seriously, which brought new attention. Not all of it welcome. That night, as most of the crew slept, alarms blared throughout the command ship. "What's happening?" Tom demanded, rushing into the control room still pulling on his uniform jacket. Jack was already there, his face grim. "Structural failure in Section 3. We're losing it." On the screens, they could see a critical support beam breaking apart. As it failed, the surrounding structures began to collapse. 3 months of work was being destroyed before their eyes. "Get the repair robots out there now," Kate ordered. "We need to contain the damage." For hours, they fought to save what they could. By morning, the situation was under control, but the damage was extensive. Nearly a quarter of their completed work had been destroyed. It wasn't an accident, Jack said grimly, holding up a piece of debris that had been brought in for analysis. The support beam was weakened deliberately. Sabotage. A heavy silence fell over the room. Tom looked at the faces of his team, tired, dirty, but still determined. Who would do this? Miguel asked. The council. Tom shook his head. I don't think so. Vex seemed genuinely impressed by our work, but there are many in the galaxy who don't want to see the power balance shift. If humans succeed where the older races failed, we threaten the established order, Kate finished. So what do we do now? Jack asked. We've lost months of work. Tom looked out the window at the damaged section of the ring, then back at his team. They expected us to fail from the beginning. This changes nothing except our timeline. We rebuild stronger than before. And we increase security, Kate added. I'll design new sensors to detect any tampering. Miguel nodded. I'll strengthen the critical components, make them more resistant to sabotage. And I'll review the construction sequences, Jack said. Add redundancies so that a single failure can't cause a cascade. Tom looked at his team with pride. This was what humans did best: adapt, overcome, and grow stronger from setbacks. Where other species might see failure and give up, humans saw a challenge to meet. Send a message to Earth, he told his communications officer. We need more people, more resources, and send a message to the council as well. What should it say, sir? The officer asked. Tom smiled grimly. Tell them construction continues on schedule. Tell them the Dyson ring will be completed as planned. As the team dispersed to begin repairs, Tom remained at the window, looking out at the stars. Someone had tried to stop them. Someone who feared what would happen if humans succeeded. That meant that they were on the right track. They said it couldn't be built. He murmured to himself, we're going to prove them wrong. 2 years into the Dyson Ring project, the structure was an impressive sight. Nearly 15% of the giant circle around the red dwarf star was complete. The finished sections already captured enormous amounts of energy, enough to power several frontier worlds. The sabotage attack had only made the human team stronger. They had rebuilt the damaged sections with improved materials and better security systems. The work moved faster than before, as if the setback had only increased their determination. In the main control room of the command ship, Kate stared at her screens with growing concern. For days, she had been running new calculations, checking and rechecking her results. The news wasn't good. Tom, we need to talk, she said when the project leader entered the room. Privately. They moved to a small meeting room. Kate closed the door and projected a model of the Dyson ring onto the table between them. We have a serious problem, she said. Her usual confidence was gone. My models predict that once we reach 20% completion, a resonance pattern will develop here, here, and here. She pointed to 3 spots on the ring model that began to glow red. Resonance? Tom asked. Like how a bridge can collapse if soldiers march across it in step. Exactly, Kate said. But much worse. The gravitational forces from the star will create vibrations in the structure. Those vibrations will build on each other, growing stronger and stronger. Can't we just reinforce those sections? Kate shook her head. It's not that simple. The resonance will affect the entire ring. If we reach 20% completion with our current design, the whole structure will tear itself apart. Tom sat heavily in his chair. Is there a solution? I've been trying to find one for weeks, Kate admitted. But even our new mathematical approaches can't solve this. It's a fundamental problem with the physics involved. She looked at Tom with sadness. The council was right. Maybe it really is impossible. Word of the problem spread quickly through the command staff. Miguel and Jack joined Kate in attempting to find a solution, but after a week of non-stop work, they were no closer to an answer. Then a message arrived from the Galactic Council. They had learned of the resonance problem and were calling an emergency session. The human team was ordered to attend. The journey to Nexus Prime was tense. Tom, Kate, Miguel, and Jack knew what awaited them. The council would shut down their project. 2 years of work, the efforts of thousands of humans, all for nothing. The council chamber was packed when they arrived. Representatives from dozens of species were present, not just the 12 main councilors. News of the human project had become the talk of the galaxy. Ambassador Miller, Councilor Vex began when they were seated. We have received reports about a critical flaw in your Dyson ring design, a resonance pattern that will destroy the structure once it reaches 20% completion. Is this correct? Tom looked at Kate, who nodded slightly. Yes, Counselor. We've identified a resonance problem. Counselor Nara leaned forward, her blue skin catching the light. We warned you from the beginning that this project was impossible. The physics simply do not allow for it. With respect, Kate said, we've overcome many impossible problems already. But not this one, Vex pointed out. And this is not a minor issue. If the ring were to collapse once at greater completion, the resulting debris could threaten nearby systems. The council has voted, announced Krull, the six-legged counselor. For safety reasons, the human Dyson ring project is to be immediately suspended. All construction must cease. Tom wanted to argue, but what could he say? They had no solution. The problem seemed truly unsolvable. The flight back to the construction site was quiet. The human team sat in the ship's small dining area, barely touching their food. 2 years, Miguel said sadly. All that work. All those people who believed in us, added Kate. Jack stared into his coffee cup, watching the dark liquid swirl as the ship experienced minor turbulence. The movements of the coffee created a familiar pattern, waves that moved outward, then reflected back, creating complex interference patterns. Something clicked in Jack's mind. Wait, he said suddenly, sitting up straight. I think I have an idea. The others looked at him with little hope. They had already tried everything they could think of. The resonance, Jack continued, excitement growing in his voice. We've been trying to prevent it. But what if we work with it instead? He grabbed a napkin and began sketching quickly. On Earth, we built bridges with tuned mass dampers, devices that create counter vibrations to cancel out dangerous oscillations. Kate frowned. But the scale is completely different. We'd need hundreds of massive dampers spread throughout the ring. Exactly, Jack said. We place damping modules at precise intervals. They don't fight the forces directly. They create controlled counter vibrations that cancel out the resonance. Miguel studied the sketch. We could build the dampers from coffee comp, make them adjustable to respond to changing conditions. Kate was already typing calculations into her tablet. The math, she muttered, then looked up with wide eyes. It could work. It actually could work. The dampers would need to be precisely tuned and placed. But, for the first time in weeks, hope returned to their faces. How did you come up with this? Tom asked, looking at Jack's sketch. Jack held up his coffee cup with a smile. Watching this, the way the waves interact when the ship moves, it reminded me of old Earth bridges and how they solved similar problems centuries ago. So we solve an advanced physics problem with coffee and old bridges. Miguel laughed. Perfect. They returned to the construction site energized with new purpose. While Tom prepared to face the council again, the others worked frantically to develop a prototype damping module. 3 days later, they installed the first module on a completed section of the ring. Kate monitored the readings as they activated it. It's working, she announced. The vibrations are decreasing exactly as predicted. The alien observers watched in confusion as the humans celebrated. One of them approached Tom. You found a solution, he asked, clearly surprised. We did, Tom confirmed. We stopped trying to prevent the forces and learned to work with them instead. The observer looked puzzled. And this idea came from a cup of coffee? And old bridges, Tom added with a smile. Sometimes the best solutions are the simplest ones. Within days, they had sent their new designs to the council along with proof that the resonance problem could be solved. The council reluctantly allowed the project to continue, though many councilors remained skeptical. As construction resumed, Tom gathered the human team for a toast. To coffee and bridges, he said, raising his cup, and to proving the impossible is possible after all. 3 years after Tom had first proposed the project, the day of completion arrived. The final segment of the Dyson ring waited to be connected, hovering in space as thousands of workers and robots made the last preparations. The command ship was crowded with important visitors. Representatives from every galactic council race had come to witness what many still believed would be a spectacular failure. They stood in small groups, speaking quietly among themselves, occasionally glancing at the humans with a mixture of curiosity and doubt. Tom, Kate, Miguel, and Jack stood together near the main viewing window. Through it, they could see the nearly complete ring surrounding the red dwarf star. It was an amazing sight, a giant circle of human-made technology that dwarfed even the largest alien constructions. "Hard to believe we're actually finishing it," Jack said, his weathered face showing both pride and exhaustion. The past 3 years had been hard on all of them, but especially on Jack, the oldest of the team. "We're not done yet," Kate reminded him. "The activation is the real test. All our calculations, all our theories. This is where we find out if they work." Miguel nodded. "The damping modules are all in place. The coffee comp material has performed perfectly so far. But when we close the ring and activate the full energy collection system, it will work," Tom said firmly. He looked around at his team. "Whatever happens, remember what we've already accomplished. We did what they said couldn't be done." Jack laughed. "Let's hope it actually works, though. I hate to have to tell everyone back on Earth that we almost built the impossible." Over the communication system, the countdown began. The final segment moved slowly into position, guided by precision robots. Special locking mechanisms engaged, connecting it to the rest of the structure. "Ring structure complete," announced the chief engineer. "All segments report green status." A cheer went up from the human crew members. Even some of the alien observers looked impressed. But the most difficult part was yet to come. "Begin activation sequence," Tom ordered. Throughout the massive structure, systems began powering up. Energy collectors extended toward the star, ready to capture its radiation. The damping modules activated, ready to counter any resonance patterns that might develop. "Energy readings are climbing," Kate reported, watching her screens. 10%, 20%, 30%. Everyone held their breath. This was the moment when their calculations would be proven right or wrong. If the ring failed now, it would be catastrophic. 40%, 50%, 60%, Kate continued. One of the alien counselors moved closer to Tom. "Your team has already accomplished more than we thought possible," he said quietly. "Even if it fails now, this project will be remembered." "It won't fail," Tom replied, never taking his eyes off the ring. 70%, 80%, 90%. Kate's voice grew more excited with each number. "Energy collection at full capacity. All systems stable." The command center erupted in cheers. Humans hugged each other, laughed, and some even cried with joy. The ring was working, collecting energy from the star at exactly the levels they had predicted, with no signs of instability. The alien observers watched in stunned silence. What they had declared impossible was now reality before their eyes. "The frontier worlds are reporting energy reception," a communications officer called out. "The transfer system is working perfectly. They're receiving more power than they've ever had before." In the days that followed, the human team worked to ensure everything continued to function properly. The ring not only worked, it worked better than their most optimistic predictions. The energy it captured would end centuries of shortages on the frontier worlds, opening new possibilities for expansion and development. 1 week after the successful activation, The Galactic Council called a special session. Tom and his team were asked to attend. The council chamber felt different this time. There were no dismissive looks, no condescending tones. The human team was greeted with respect, even admiration. Ambassador Miller, Councillor Vex began, his crystal form gleaming. The council has reached a unanimous decision. In recognition of humanity's extraordinary achievement, Earth is being offered immediate advanced membership in the Galactic Council, an honor previously requiring millennia of proven achievement. Murmurs of approval filled the chamber. It was indeed an unprecedented offer, elevating humans to the same status as species that had been traveling the stars when humans were still living in caves. Tom looked at his team, then back at the counselors. "We appreciate the offer," he said, "but I think we'll progress at our own pace." Surprise rippled through the chamber. Even Kate, Miguel, and Jack looked startled. "You decline?" Counselor Nera asked in disbelief. "Not permanently," Tom clarified, "but humanity still has much to learn. And with respect, I think the Council has things to learn from us as well. We would prefer to earn our place through continued achievement rather than one single success." The Council members exchanged glances. This was unexpected, but not entirely unwelcome. It showed a maturity they hadn't expected from such a young species. As the human team prepared to return to Earth as heroes, they noticed something interesting. Engineers and scientists from other races were studying their designs, their methods, their approaches. The older species were learning from the newcomers, combining logic with intuition, embracing happy accidents, and finding wisdom in ancient techniques. Before their departure, Counselor Vex approached Tom privately. For once, the crystalline being seemed uncertain. "I must ask, Ambassador," he said, "how did you know you could succeed when all evidence suggested failure?" Tom smiled. "That's the thing about humans, Counselor. Telling us something is impossible doesn't discourage us. It challenges us, and we love a good challenge." Vex considered this. "And what challenge will humans tackle next?" "We have some ideas," Tom said with a smile. "There are still plenty of impossible things left to do." Back on Earth, the team was welcomed with celebrations around the world. The Dyson ring became a symbol of human potential, a reminder that no challenge was too great when faced with determination, creativity, and the willingness to try new approaches. In universities and research centers, a new generation of scientists and engineers looked to the stars with fresh eyes. If the Dyson ring was possible, what other impossible dreams might become reality? And in space, the great ring circled its star, collecting energy that brought light and power to worlds that had known only darkness and limitation. It stood as a monument not just to human achievement, but to the power of believing that the impossible was simply a problem waiting for a solution, a challenge waiting to be met, a barrier waiting to be broken, a future waiting to be built.